Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India News Hour, India's voice to the world. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran. Coming up in the next hour. The US and Israel attack Iran. Smoke rises in Tehran. Iran closes its airspace. Israel declares nationwide emergency.
The objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world.
Pakistan airstrikes on Afghanistan get US backing as Islamabad vows to continue operations. Prime Minister Modi to shortly inaugurate a semiconductor facility at Sanand in Gujarat. And Poland plans a social media ban for children under 15. In the big news we are tracking here on DD India News Hour, Israel has launched a preventive missile attack against Iran, the country's defense minister said on Saturday. Israel's defense ministry announced that it had launched what it called a preemptive strike on Iran as sirens sounded in Jerusalem and people across the country received phone alerts about an extremely serious threat. Israel's defense minister Israel Katz declared a special nationwide state of emergency, warning that a missile and drone attack on Israel's civilian population is expected imminently. Israel's transportation minister Miri Regev ordered the director of the Israel Civil Aviation Authority to close the country's airspace until further orders. Besides, Iraq's Erbil airport has announced suspension of air traffic as well. The Russian Ministry of Transport also suspended flights to Iran and Israel. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is not in Tehran and has been transferred to a secure location. The U.S. Embassy in Qatar implemented shelter in place for all personnel, recommending that all of its citizens to do the same until further notice. The attack follows repeated U.S.-Israeli warnings that they would strike again if Iran pressed ahead with its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. So in a dramatic escalation, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that American forces have initiated major combat operations in Iran and annihilate the country's navy. He says the U.S. aims to defend the Americans by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, as said by President Trump in a video posted on social media.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries. Among the regime's very first acts was to back a violent takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding dozens of American hostages for 444 days. In 1983, Iran's proxies carried out the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut that killed 241 American military personnel. In 2000, they knew and were probably involved with the attack on the USS Cole. Many died. Iranian forces killed and maimed hundreds of American service members in Iraq. The regime's proxies have continued to launch countless attacks against American forces stationed in the Middle East in recent years, as well as U.S. naval and commercial vessels in international shipping lanes. It's been mass terror, and we're not going to put up with it any longer. From Lebanon to Yemen and Syria to Iraq, the regime has armed, trained, and funded terrorist militias that have soaked the earth with blood and guts. And it was Iran's proxy, Hamas, that launched the monstrous October 7th attacks on Israel, slaughtering more than 1,000 innocent people, including 46 Americans, while taking 12 of our citizens hostage. It was brutal, something like the world has never seen before.
All right, joining us are my colleague Amritpal Singh and a special guest, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, retired, a former Director General of the Infantry of the Indian Army. To you first, Amritpal, tell us more about the Indian government's advisory for its nationals in the region.
The embassy has been advisory saying that the Indians living in Iran should remain indoors and should avoid non-essential travel. They put out numbers in case there are Indians are in distress. They can get in touch with the Indian embassy, and they could be as we know, the Iranian airspace has been closed. So the Indians can't come out of Iran right now, but the embassies asked them to not go out, stay inside, indoors, and in the event of distress, put out numbers to contact the embassy, and the embassy will try and help them in a manner to the best extent possible. Ramesh?
Amrit, do stay on. We'll come back to you momentarily for more updates as we go along. For viewers who are joining us, we are tracking the big news here on DD India News Hour, a joint military strike on Iran by the US and Israel. Sirens going off in Israel as well. Israel declaring a nationwide emergency and smoke billowing out of Iran's capital, Tehran, as well. To discuss about these and other matters, joining us is General Kulkarni. General Kulkarni, welcome to DD India News Hour. Why these strikes and why now, when talks are on to defuse a crisis?
Ramesh, primarily two things. If you noticed what Mr. Trump said yesterday, that the talks, indirect talks, not even direct, and it is known to the Foreign Minister of Oman, and that they did accept zero stockpiling after so many days of talk, and nothing seems to be moving ahead in terms of missiles are concerned, or even for that matter, the Hamas, Houthi, and the Hezbollah groups that are concerned, which are, of course, the proxies of Iran. Regime change is a separate issue, which Americans would do it. But if the talks aren't moving beyond this zero stockpiling, which they have accepted only yesterday, that's what the Foreign Minister of Oman seems to be doing. Talks aren't direct. How much weight would America want to do? Before China can intervene or any help can come from any other country, I think USA would have thought best is to preempt. And in this preempt, it is a very, very severe strike. Obviously, the two locations that both the Jamaurin Square and the Hassanabad Square is indicative that these are squares which are occupied by the civil population of Iran in huge numbers during the day. So they really have got to know that they are under tremendous threat. So internally also, Iran is breaking. Number one. Number two, and yet no official statement coming out of Khamenei indicative. One doesn't know where he is. United States is formed into Syria. United States has put its foot already in Pakistan. We know what's going on between Pakistan and Afghanistan of a recent thing. So there is so much. And America has been telling Iran again and again that it's time they gave up their nuclear enrichment program and also to give up the missile program, the long-range missile of over 2,000 kilometers. But Iran seems to think that these are issues of sovereignty, and those issues of sovereignty that they would be entitled to have missiles with such long range which threaten Israel. If it threatens Israel, obviously America is not going to be tolerating it. As a result of it, I thought it was a preemptive strike which has hit Iran during day, unable to do annihilation of the Navy, very much on the cards. Much of the talk by Iran that they would rather sink the aircraft carriers of America, not possible. The Americans would have already done the electronic jamming and all kinds of things with the missiles and all the military equipment that is available with Iran to be able to put out against Israel. So we find Iran is actually on a back foot. It's best for Iran to prevent further destruction of Iran that they must give in right now, because otherwise, with 2 aircraft carriers on site, with the finest of the aircraft, all the aircraft that are flying in Iran are such old. You just had a helicopter crash in Tehran, in Iran, recently. So Iran's really in a back foot. I don't think it should attempt to even further destroy. And if it does so, I think there will be a regime change automatically, because Iran will implode from within people, because sanctions over the years, this kind of economic adversity in Iran over the years, water shortage in Tehran over almost a year plus. So you find Iran's in a terrible state with so many sanctions, nothing coming available. Then Raza Pahlavi from America putting pressure, even though he may not succeed initially. Regime change is not so easy in Iran. But all other things will lead to regime change, obviously, because Iran, I don't think, will be able to withstand the kind of attacks now launched, and that too preemptive with a view to instigate Iran, that all these days we've been talking about wanting to hit the bases in West Asia of USA, 20,000 troops of America in West Asia, that they could do so. I doubt very much Iran were able to do it, because in the 12-day war, we saw the total air supremacy of Israel on the Iranian airspace. Today, they may be flying their aircraft, but that's just for more for morale boosting of the Iranian people during day, because the attack launched during day. But I don't think it's best, and as Trump has already announced, 4 days of war on Iran. And 4 days of war is not going to be easy for Iran to withstand. I personally would feel, my assessment would be that it's time this pressure brought on Iran, that it's good to have zero stockpiling of nuclear, give up the missile program for the time being, and then get into a discussion later in a more amicable environment, because right now the talks in Geneva are not direct talks. So you don't have the Americans and the Iranians talking to each other. They're talking through the Oman. So Oman's facilitating the talks and the indirect talks. So under these circumstances, because it can be interpreted wrongly, it can be conveyed wrongly, resulting in what now we see what has happened in Iran. Iran's under tremendous pressure. I think about maybe 24 to 48 hours, it will be very, very clear whether Iran can retaliate. I don't think Iran would be in a state to retaliate right now, because everything would have been jammed. Americans have not come for months on, they are there. And the way Mr. Trump has started already to state and recount what the Iranians have been doing for the last 47 years, how terrible the people are, and how ruthlessly they've been behaving, and how the way the Americans have been treated by the Iranians. All this is indicated that the relations between Iran and America are at its lowest, and obviously America feels rather more convinced that Israel's existential threat might just be there.
Right.
Iran is not subdued right now. Yeah.
General, do stay on. Let me go across to my colleague Amrit Bal Singh one more time on this broadcast. Amrit, what are you picking up on the latest from either Tel Aviv or Tehran? What more can you tell us about the joint US and Israeli strikes inside Iran?
What we know, Ramesh, right now is that multiple cities in Iran have been, that it's not just Tehran, it's Qom, it's the outskirts of Tehran, it's near the border with Iraq, it's in North Iran. So multiple facilities, cities and facilities have been targeted, both by the Americans and the Israelis, and from various locations. Some reports suggest that the American aircraft carrier in the state of Hormuz is also launching attacks. There are both Air Force U.S. Air Force involved in the attacks, and there are missiles being targeted at Iran. We are not clear right now as to what level of retaliation Iran is showing. There are no reports on that. There are only reports that there is smoke billowing out of cities in Iran. How Iran will retaliate the coming hours will be crucial to see. But the Americans and the Israelis are taking no chances. They have told their citizens across in the area. The Americans have put out advisories for Americans in Qatar to remain indoors and avoid non-essential travel, not go out. It is expecting some sort of a retaliation. The Israelis already have declared a state of emergency. Schools have been closed. All non-essential activity has been put on hold. What they call full activity has been stopped, and only essential activity is allowed. Public gatherings are not allowed. So I think the Israelis and the Americans have factored in that Iran may retaliate. How much Iran will retaliate depends upon the scale of this combat or preemptive strike, which Israel calls it a preventive strike. Donald Trump has called it a major combat operation. If the scale is limited like last year, then we could see limited retaliation. But if it is a much larger operation, Iran will have to retaliate, depending upon what the objective of this whole strike is. Is it just to weaken Iran? Is it to hit its nuclear bases? Is it to hit its missile, surface-to-surface missile facilities? Or is it to actually affect a regime change and take out, say, President Pezeshkian or the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei? So it remains to be seen, what the objective of the exercise is, which is not very clear from the statements coming both out of Israel and the American president. They haven't put out what the provocation, the immediate provocation really was. He's spoken about the nuclear program and not allowing them to have a nuclear weapon, and the missile programs, which puts its citizens and assets in the region under threat, its allies under threat, etc. But those are both sides haven't put out a pinpointed immediate provocation for launching these strikes. So one is not very clear what the objective of the strike is. Is it to weaken Iran, then renegotiate with a weakened Iran, or is it actually an all-out operation to effect a regime change? So the Iranian response would also depend upon how far the Israelis and the Americans go, Ramesh.
Right, Amrit, do stay on. Also joining us are my colleagues Akshay Dongre as well as Shubhendu Ghosh. To you first, Akshay. Before I come to you, Akshay, let me just recap again the latest news that's coming in as we speak. According to the Jerusalem Post newspaper of Israel, sirens are sounding across northern Israel, including Golan Heights, as Iran retaliates. It goes on to say Iran has launched towards Israel, and it comes after the US President Trump confirmed that the US has begun an operation against the Islamist regime. Akshay, what more are you picking up?
Well, the latest information, Ramesh, that's coming in right now is a statement from the Israeli Defense Forces, who are stating that Iran has already launched missile strikes against Israel, and they are intercepting the strikes. So I would like to read the statement, which says that a short while ago, sirens were sounded in several areas across the country following the identification of missile launched from Iran towards the state of Israel. The public is requested to follow the instruction of Home Front Command. At this time, the Israeli Air Force is operating to intercept the strike threats where necessary to remove the threat. The defense is not hermetic, and therefore it is essential that a public continue to adhere to the Home Front Command's guidelines, and they are requested to follow all the guidelines that have been given to the people. So it is clear that Iran has already launched a retaliatory strike that is being intercepted right now, but Israel also understands that no 100% protection can be provided, even though they have an iron dome, even though they have have excellent missile tracking capabilities, and they can intercept several missiles at the same time. But Iran also has been preparing itself for the worst, and the worst has now happened with strikes taking place in 5 major cities of Iran, including the capital Tehran, a city of Qom, and other cities as well in the central parts of the country. So if they launch a massive air barrage against Israel, and as well as the US forces, US bases in the region, including in Qatar, including in Jordan, in the UAE and other countries, there can be a massive damage to not only the infrastructure there, but also to the lives of civilians as well as military personnel that are stationed. But you cannot deny that the strike that has taken place in such a coordinated manner was not being planned in advance. So there has a planning that has gone into effect. So Israeli as well as the US forces would 100% would have taken into account a retaliation coming in from a country like Iran that is famous around the world for its ballistic missile capabilities, including the Fatah missile range as well as other missiles that it has procured from Russia as well as China. So the situation remains extremely tense right now. Sirens are being sounded in Israel. People have been asked to exercise utmost caution. An Air India flight that was traveling to Tel Aviv has turned around and has come back. That has a statement coming in from Air India as well. So the situation remains tense. Indian embassy has already issued a statement in Iran as well that Indians living in Iran should exercise utmost caution, should not go near military bases, should not go near crowded areas, and should remain sheltered as much as possible and wait for any more instruction coming in from the Indian embassy there in Tehran. So the situation is escalating right now. If the retaliations do take place and if there is casualties in Israel as well as in the US forces, then 100% there is going to be a much wider escalation that is going to take in a few hours from now. So it's a matter of hours now that will determine the fate of the region as well as the fate of this particular conflict. So situation is escalating by every minute. New reports coming in. Even a statement has come in from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has said that Iran must not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. That has been their repeated statement for decades now. But it seems that the Atomic Energy Center being targeted and several other government offices being targeted, there can be mass casualties as well in Iran to not only the military personnel but civilians as well. So the scale of the Iranian retaliation will also depend on the damage that has been inflicted by the Israeli and US strikes on their country.
Right, so news coming in thick and fast. Akshay, stay on joining us. He's another of my colleagues, Suman as well. But Shubhendu, before I come to you, let me recap the news we are tracking here on DD India News. At this very moment, it is just getting to 2 p.m. New Delhi time or 10:30 in the morning in Tel Aviv. The US has launched what it calls a major combat operation in Iran designed to eliminate what it calls imminent threats from the country's Islamist regime. This according to President Donald Trump. Israel saying that it has launched preventative strikes on Iran and is preparing for a retaliation from Iran and has since closed its airspace. Shubhendu, we've heard from Akshay talking about the situation in Tel Aviv and other places as we speak, and also about the places attacked inside Iran. Now, what do we know about the specific targets in those locations inside Iran? What were the US and Israeli forces actually trying to target?
Hello, Ramesh. Yes, things are evolving very fast. If I can just quickly give a context.
Sure.
I was, in fact, in Jerusalem yesterday, and we were returning from Jerusalem, and our drivers were informing how the markets today are all going to be shut. It's good that we're leaving yesterday because it's a day of Shabbat. There's Ramzan and Shabbat observation, for which today, Saturday, is going to be a time when most of the Israelis would have been at home. It's a religious holiday. There's also a period of Ramzan that is going on. People of Iran would be engaged. This morning, Israel and US, Ramesh, as we've been tracking, launched a joint strike on Iran. We also heard President Donald Trump on his Truth Social platform giving out a statement very clearly saying that it is a combat operation. And while there is, it has been spoken that it is the nuclear ecosystem that they want to destroy of Iran, the threat of ballistic missile, President Trump said, in fact, very soon could in fact reach United States. And before it happens, America would like to completely obliterate. He uses that word very often, obliterate completely. This time, not just the defense ecosystem, but all the government itself. There are two levels of conversation that President Trump had in the context of Iran. One was directed at the regime, saying that this time the attack is for the regime change very clearly. He also said that he's giving an opportunity to the Revolutionary Guards, that's the Iranian army, to in fact surrender. To put it simply, the police must also surrender and not engage in combat. If they do, they would be treated fairly. They would in fact also be spared. If they do not, he says, they're most definitely going to be killed. And then he speaks to the people of Iran directly, saying that they've waited for this kind of a revolution and United States assistance for a long time. And the moment of that has come now. They're now going to completely destroy the head of Iranian regime, the government, clearly aiming at the supreme leader and President Pezeshkian. And that brings me to answer the question that you'd asked, Ramesh, about the places that were targeted. Tehran, of course, was the most important target, Iranian capital. But the attacks have been spread across Iran. We're learning about Isfahan, Tabriz, Elam, Qom city, important religious capital of Iran. Disbul in the south is also being targeted. So we see a very expansive choice of targets by the joint forces of the United States and Israel. Some of the key targets in Tehran, in fact, happen to be key government offices. So it appears that the target may have been in a manner that we've seen in earlier in Venezuela, to target, as it were, the head of the state, head of the government, and try to see how things develop from there. But what we're hearing from sources in Iran is that President Pezeshkian and Supreme Leader Khamenei have in fact been moved to a secret location. But these targets targeting the main government building clearly state, Ramesh, that they were, what the American and the Israeli forces were aiming to do is to eliminate the top of the government and then see how things percolate. And then President Trump's message to the people of Iran that it is your time to now take over the government. America is launching its biggest ever attack on Iran. It's ready to topple this government, which he uses many adjectives to talk about. It's a source of mass terror. He says, he also refers to the history of Iran-US conflict. He says that this Iranian regime has always chanted death to America, and the threats have only increased in the recent past. He refers to the operation, remember, less than 6 to 8 months ago, the Midnight Hammer operation targeting Iranian nuclear facilities in Natanz, Fordow. And he says this time they're not just targeting any defense infrastructure alone, but they want to topple this. In no uncertain terms, it talks about an operation which is aimed at regime change.
Right.
So that makes, Ramesh, this particular operation, which is ongoing and expected to last quite long, very significant. Ramesh?
Indeed. Just to recap the big news we are tracking here on DD India at this moment, it is just after 2 p.m. in New Delhi, 10:30 in the morning in Tel Aviv, and you're watching a continuous coverage here on DD India of the latest joint strikes on Iran by both the US and Israeli forces. If I can quickly recap the news we are tracking at this moment, Israel says it has launched a preventative missile attack against Iran. Israel's defense ministry is saying that it has launched a quote-unquote preemptive strike on Iran as sirens sounded in Jerusalem, and people across the country received phone alerts about an extremely serious threat. Before I bring in my colleague and a special guest, Ambassador Anil Kumar Trigunai, let me again recap the news that we are tracking here on DD India News Hub. According to ANI news agency, Iranian officials on Saturday have vowed a quote-unquote crushing response against their targets in response to a major joint military strike by Israel and the US. This, according to Iran's Tasnim news agency, it goes on to say that Israel and the US launched a joint military strike on Iran, which was codenamed Operation Roaring Lion, targeting military sites, missile production facilities, and areas near Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's office. So these are interesting and important information. The targets were military sites, missile production facilities, and areas near Khamenei's office. And it says that several ministries in southern Tehran were reportedly struck, and residents heard powerful blasts as tensions surged. If I can quickly also report, based on the Times of Israel newspaper, it says there are no reports of injuries following Iran's ballistic missile attack on northern Israel. At least 2 missiles were fired, with one reportedly striking an open area. Let me go across to Akhilesh Suman. Akhilesh, tell us more.
Actually, recently, we have got a news that Iran has again launched a barrage of missiles over Israel. IDF is concerned. And son of Iran's late Shah, Raja Pahlavi, he is telling that our victory is very near. In between, that we are getting the news from Jordan, that Jordan is trying to save its sky, and there are sirens in Jordan's capital, Amman. Qatar is also worried about the situation, and Qatar is making a drill that its skies are safe. So I think the neighboring countries of Iran are also on highest alert, and they are, apprehending that they are feeling that Iran might send some missiles on air bases in their own in their countries. So I think it is a very tense situation now that Iranians are also retaliating, and if Iranians retaliate, then that retaliation can also come again in big force from Israeli and American side. So I think situation is aggravating again and again, and situation is in a situation that unless Iranian regime, Iranian center of power surrenders, the war will continue. Given the fact that earlier, there was negotiation between US and Iran on the issue of nuclear enrichment, and a statement had come from Oman side that Iran has agreed on stopping all nuclear enrichment. But in between there is a strike from Israeli side, and later American President Donald Trump also confirmed it is a joint attack over Iran. And Donald Trump has also called all Iranians to stay at home and be ready to take over power of all institutions in Iran. So I think it is an open call for rebellion inside Iran, and American and Israeli forces are ready for any consequences. In between, the leaders of Iran are being told from Iranian side that they are safe. Pezeshkian is said to be safe. Khamenei is also said to be safe. But still reports have to come that how many places Iran has been attacked. Iran is still not confirming that how many places Iran is being attacked. But there are bombs many places in Tehran and many other places in Iran also. So in between, India has also advised all its citizens who are there in Israel and also in Iran to keep safe and be in touch with Indian embassy in their respective countries. So I think it's a really a very grave situation, and all countries in the world who...
Right, Akhilesh, stay on. Let me bring in our guest, Ambassador Anil Kumar Trigunath. Ambassador Trigunath is a former envoy to Jordan, Libya, and Malta. Ambassador, as my colleague was reporting there, if I can also quote President Trump himself, he says, "The hour of your freedom is at hand," him telling Iranian citizens and urging them to, quote unquote, take over your government once the operation is over. My question to you is this, which I've been asking on this broadcast for the last several minutes now. Why these strikes, and why now when talks are on to defuse a crisis? And what is a preventative or a preemptive strike? What were Israel and the US anticipating, Ambassador?
Well, I think they wanted to contain Iran's any possibility of going out of the talks and continue to force them. That was one of the reasons. Secondly, you know that the United States, and if anybody was believing in it, that will not happen. Then I think we were naive that this kind of an attacks will not happen, while United States this time has brought in a very heavy force to contend with the Iranian attacks or Iranian response. It was very much unlike the last time, but quite similar playbook. While 6 rounds of talk last time had happened, this was immediately, then we saw that while there were hopes that the nuclear deal will be signed and something will happen, or there will be forward movement, the attacks started and 12 days war continued. But that time, the United States played a little safer game by allowing Iran to also retaliate on its own base. But this time, President Trump is continuing, and I think that he's very much against basically the Ayatollah, this regime change, because regime change agenda has been the fundamental part of the US foreign policy. Their own national security advisors have mentioned that 60 to 70 times they have done it across the world. So this is something that has been wanted. If they don't like a particular regime, and as President Trump himself is saying that they are being called as Satans and whatnot, death to America. So that is the kind of, he's trying to get some kind of an inspiration from that thing to take action against Iran. While Omani foreign minister yesterday said that Iran had agreed not to enrich at all the enriched uranium will be moved out. And virtually the progress was going on both sides. But then it seems that there is, and I always said that Israel does not want this to happen, because Israel wants complete elimination of any threat from Iran, any kind of threat. And that is that if this kind of an agreement happens, again, between the United States and Iran, that is something will not be palatable to the Israelis. And therefore, they have precipitated it today. And it is, of course, a joint thing. And they hope that a new regime, when it comes, if they are able to successfully do so, it becomes very difficult in such situations. But if they are able to do so, then they hope that it will be a regime that is the previous Shah, that they will be very friendly to Israel, because Shah, Pahlavi's son, has already mentioned that he'll recognize Israel, he will provide all kinds of facilities to the Western countries and do everything that exactly the opposite what the current regime has been doing. But it's not going to be an easy thing, because wherever the United States has basically militarily intervened, it has been a complete disaster. So we are looking at disaster to happen in front of our own eyes now, this time in the West Asia region, which is the most important region for us, frankly. If the war really escalates the way it is being projected, then it will have a terrible consequences for everyone, including us.
Absolutely. We'll come to that in just a bit, Ambassador. If I can bring in my colleague Akshay back in the discussion. Akshay, just to amplify the point that Ambassador Trigunai was making there, and I'm quoting from Associated Press as we speak, quoting the US President as saying that the US government will push for regime change in Iran, and the first strike landed near Khamenei's office. What do you make of it? You keep a close track on defense matters. What are you picking up on the US military build-up as well in the region as we speak?
To sort of secure all kind of contingency that may arise after Israel and US co-strike Iran. So the possibilities of attack right now are, or rather retaliation from Iran's side, is that they can strike the US carrier group, they can strike Israeli territory, they can also strike neighboring countries, especially the US bases that are in the neighboring countries, in Jordan, in countries like the UAE, in countries like Saudi Arabia as well, for that matter, in countries like Qatar too. So all the countries that are housing US facilities, that are housing US forces, are being considered sort of hostile by the Iranian regime. The reports are coming in from the Iranian media that the strikes have also been launched from the Iraqi air as well. So Iraqi airspace has been used by the Israeli jets to launch strikes against Iran, so as to sort of surprise the Iranian defense systems as well, that are pointing, or rather focusing on majority of missiles coming in from the Israeli side. So the situation remains quite grim. Israel doesn't have the capability to take on Iran on its own. Israel does realize that. So until and unless US was fully on board with the last round of talks taking place and desirable result not coming out from those talks as well, Israel has finally persuaded US that the long stalemate that has continued over Iran's nuclear ambitions will continue unless the regime change takes place. So initially we a few months back we saw the kind of protests that were happening. Several people were killed. Earlier as well, Donald Trump had said that Iran should stop killing its own people, otherwise they will have to intervene as far as military action is concerned, or in other matters as well. That major protest that could have changed the regime was suppressed by the Iranian government, and now it seems that once again US and Israel have realized that protests and revolutions are not going to bring down the Iranian regime. That remains the number one enemy, not only of Israel but the US as well in that part of the region. This seems like sort of paving a way for a regime change. The proxies obviously of US and Israel that would have instigated or would have rather aided the protest would be waiting for something like this, a destability in that part of the country, in the Iranian regime, to launch a massive protest and revolution from inside to do a regime change, because you cannot bring about an end to Iran's nuclear ambitions until and unless the regime is changed, and that is an understanding created by Israel as well as the US. I also traveled to Israel last year, and when the questions were posed by journalists to the Israeli foreign ministry officials that what exactly are your aims, then they have been quite pretty clear that no nuclear ambitions can be tolerated of Iran. Iran remains a major threat to the country and to the region as well, and Israel will weigh in all the options that are available to ensure that the regime of Iran, especially the Islamic regime that is present right now, to never have a capability of procuring any kind of nuclear arms that is an existential threat as considered by Israel. So it seems that these strikes will see a retaliation. US as well as Israel are in complete defensive mode right now after the launch of these barrage of missiles. Initial reports are coming in that yes, massive casualties can be expected from Iran as far as these attacks are concerned. The nuclear energy buildings have been targeted, the defense buildings have been targeted. Preemptive strikes usually target the airports and the airfields to ensure that the aerial superiority maintains of the preemptive striker. So all of these strikes would have a massive casualty. There will be a retaliation from Iran, as understandable by both US and Israel. So their goal will be to contain the retaliation coming in from Iran, and then strike Iran to the point when people when they can instigate a regime change in that part of the region, but also taking cues from, or rather taking lessons from regime changes in Iraq and Libya and other countries there. They will have to there is a probability that any kind of regime change can only increase the destability in that part of the world. It remains unclear that what is the end objective, but regime change in Iran remains a top priority for both the US and Israeli forces that can later negotiate with any and every power that comes up in that vacuum after the regime change has been instigated. So this seems like a primary motive, and it seems that the plan has already been initiated by both the sides.
Right, just to amplify the point that Akshay is making there, President Trump is acknowledging that there could be American casualties following Iran strikes, saying that, and I'm quoting him here, that often happens in war. And Associated Press quoting Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as saying that the joint attack was to, quote, remove an existential threat posed by Iran. He goes on to say that our joint operation will create the conditions for the brave Iranian people to take their fate into their own hands. Shubhendu, you were in Jerusalem a short while ago. In fact, tell us what you heard and saw there, given the the optics surrounding the tensions, even as talks were happening between the US and Iran indirectly at that elsewhere in the world. So what was your sense of the developments there?
Ramesh, if I can answer your question in a couple of parts. Part one about daily life in Jerusalem and Israel, talking to different stakeholders and the people around us, our drivers, staff in the hotel, and other people. And it looks like life as usual, whether conflict is beginning or ending. It seems that being engaged in an active conflict is a very real part of Israeli existence. Every hotel, every house has access to a certain bunker. There are these alarms that ring off in case of an imminent attack, and people are supposed to move to the bunkers. When we landed in Israel, we were given out a handout which says that, download these app and it will warn you about any imminent attack. So what I'm trying to get at is that this sort of a threat that Israel calls an existential threat is always there in Israel, and people are used to it. Even when there is a moment of peace, they talk about we're waiting for when the next conflict will break out, because it's a very uncomfortable silence and peace that had prevailed this while, especially after the Gaza conflict. And with these attacks being launched, once again, Israel and United States, this time, as we understand, Ramesh, are targeting a complete regime change. So the game now that we see is going to be the Israeli and American forces looking for the Iranian leadership. Remember, President Trump, in no uncertain terms, has spoken about it's not just about defense infrastructure as it was last year when under Operation Midnight Hammer, United States had seek to destroy the nuclear infrastructure, enrichment infrastructure of Iran. And President Trump had claimed victory in that operation, saying that the nuclear infrastructure is destroyed. But this time in his address, he spoke about the regime change, and he refers to the Khamenei regime as, I quote, a wicked, radical dictatorship. And he refers to the Iranian people, calling it an hour of freedom, their only chance in generation to be able to take control of their destiny. If we talk about the leadership of Israel, Ramesh, they were never quite happy about the negotiations between the United States and Iran. A negotiation in a context where your sheer existence is in threat does not seem quite right from the Israeli point of view. Iran also looks at Israel from the same perspective of a constant threat. So in that sense, negotiations, although there were around at least 3 rounds of negotiations around Iran's nuclear infrastructure, America also tried to negotiate its ballistic missile capability, which it wanted gone. And Iran had said that that particular part of its defense infrastructure is not up for negotiations. But still, the two sides were talking. President Trump, even in this address, spoke about we wanted to strike a deal. I quote, he says, but then he says we can't take it anymore. So there seems to be a kind of exhaustion of that possibility of striking a deal. But for Israel, this strike becomes very important because that context of negotiation creates an uncertain period for Israel. It does not know what America would negotiate for, and it would at least ensure that Iran would be able to retain much of its infrastructure, most importantly, its regime, headed by Supreme Leader Khamenei and President Pezeshkian. And that is what Israel is seeking to target this time over for its own existential concerns. It wants the regime change, and United States and Israel then coming together to sort of strike Iran in that context. And therefore, remember, regime change is what we'll have to focus on in terms of our conversations, because till that happens, the strikes and this conflict is going to continue. I don't see any immediate ceasefire or end to the conflict, because this time America, like in the case of Venezuela, is seeking to go for the head.
Ambassador Trigunayat, talking about regime change, if I can quickly quote what President Trump has just said in that televised speech of his. He says he's sending a message to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, that reports directly to Khamenei. And I'm quoting him here. He says, "You should lay down your arms. You will be treated with total immunity, or you will face certain death." How do you think Khamenei and the IRGC would respond from here onwards?
President Trump or the Americans don't understand the region, Iran, or the IRGC. They think that by statements and by show of force in the naval armada, until and unless the United States or Israel get in there with the boots on ground, there can be no victory. As simple as that. That's why they are trying to foment this trouble from within. And so they are hoping that the people will rise against the regime because of the attacks from the United States, and they will think that everything is happening only because of the regime. So the purpose is somehow to destabilize the country in that sense. As far as IRGC is concerned, if you remember in the last few weeks alone, Khamenei has already worked upon his successors, fearing that he may be killed. Likewise, first time, as you know, that Israel had done all the decapitation of the major generals in the Iranian establishment. Despite that, they went on ahead with the war, and 12 days were quite disastrous, even for Israel. So I think that this is not going to be that easy this time. Unfortunate part is that Iran has got, and as Shubhendu was saying, is they have these missile capabilities which can really burn around the whole of the region. I mean, that is something that is going to be the worst case scenario. And this is something everybody has been fearing it should not happen. So, but if, let us say, hypothetically, for some reason, the IRGC thinks that, okay, the time for Ayatollah to go is gone, and so now we should take over. So that would still be a worse kind of a situation if you have a military regime there in Iran. So, which is something that I don't know. I mean, we have both covered Libya and Iraq, and we have seen what happened when these kind of military interventions taken place anywhere. Only thing that has followed is disaster and instability. And that's precisely is going to happen in Iran. But Iranian people by themselves have looked at it very seriously, what has happened to Iraq, what has happened in Syria, what has happened other places. So that's the reason it is still holding out the regime. It is quite possible that the regime has outlived its utility anymore. It has nothing further to add to the thing. The people are dissatisfied with the kind of sanctions that have happened, the economic grief that they are facing. And of course, as far as Iran and Israel are concerned, they suffer from this mad syndrome. And from 1979 onwards. So United States has now changed track. It has openly come out against the Iranian regime, which until recently it was avoiding because of the changes that have taken place in the dynamic within West Asia. So now they think that most of the other countries from the Gulf and others will not be peeved about it, and they will basically support this thing. So that's quite possible.
Ambassador, just to give context to our viewers watching this broadcast, Ambassador, in June last year, we saw the US attack or target Iranian nuclear facilities. This time around, we're seeing the US and Israel targeting areas, including those near Khamenei's office. Is that provocation enough, you think? And Iran will likely retaliate in kind? Will not take it lying down?
No, it has already started retaliating. See, Iran has been saying that they are not going to sit back. And just now I read this, that the Houthis have said that we have got the permission from our supreme leader. So the Houthis will start working in that region as well.
So are we looking at all-out war, imminent war, all-out regional conflagration?
I think so. That is what, unfortunately, we are heading towards.
Right. Let me also get in some comments from our colleagues Shubhendu and Akshay as well. Shubhendu, do you first, given the fears being expressed of an all-out imminent war, what are India's stakes really in the region when we talk about Israel, Iran and the Gulf countries in particular?
That's right, Ramesh. An all-out war does not augur well at all for India's interest. Of course, no war is good for any region, but for India's interests in particular, a significant energy interest that India has from the region, and perhaps even more important, Indian diaspora, one of the the largest concentration of Indian diaspora in different countries, including Israel, where a lot of migrant workers under the recently forged agreement for organized workforce migration go and work there. I was speaking to a few of them when I was there a couple of days back to cover Prime Minister Modi's visit, and they'd spoken about how those sirens, and they've lived through the Gaza conflict, and they speak about how those sirens running to the bunker is really a part of a daily exercise. It is not, in fact, an exception. Peace appears to be exception in the region, according to them, for what they have witnessed in the recent past. So, India's interest in vis-a-vis our own people in living in the Gulf and the larger Western Asian region, and our energy interests. Remember, India is also making steady progress towards the IMEC initiatives, which is India, Middle East, Europe corridor, for a more expansive role in global supply chain. All of that comes into severe threat if this is an all-out conflict. The region is going to be once again thrown into volatility that we've witnessed in the past with conflicts involving Gaza, Israel, and Iran. So from Indian point of view, these developments are not good. India has always pushed for peace. Prime Minister, in his just recently concluded visit to Israel, had also spoke about how India is on the side of peace. It would like all stakeholders and find negotiated solutions to problems, whether it's Palestine, whether it's other adversaries in the region. So in that sense, India is closely observing the developments. Those advisories are on, which see around such developments. People have been asked to avoid unnecessary travel to the region. People who are there already must stay at safer places and be in constant communication with the Indian embassies. But we'll have to wait and watch how this conflict pans out. If it does, in fact, expand as Iran had threatened, that its own capacity to directly hit United States as of now is not developed. But what it did warn that any attack on Iran, which has already taken place, would make it retaliate against US bases in West Asia, which are all over West Asia, whether we talk about Saudi Arabia, Israel, UAE, and other places where we also have significant Indian population, Indian diaspora living. So in that sense, a matter of concern for India too, Ramesh.
Absolutely. Ambassador Trigunayas, just again, by way of perspective and context for our viewers, the US has been pushing for zero nuclear enrichment all these days. Iran says we will have nothing of it. Enrichment is my sovereign right and I will go along with it, stick to it. President Trump also said in the run-up to these attacks that I'm waiting to hear from Tehran saying that we will not have a nuclear weapon, and that too is unpalatable to the regime there. So what really are Iran's options as we speak?
Well, now Iran's options are continuing, which were happened. I mean, you remember that this particular deal, the JCPOA, was signed during Obama's time.
Right.
As soon as President came to power, he started, and even before that, during his, when he was running for the candidacy presidency, he started saying that he'll junk it, and he junked it. And thereafter, once again, he wants to do it on his own terms by shifting goalposts. But in the recent times, if you were to believe, not the Iranians, not the Americans, you believe the Omanis who have been mediating in these talks, and they had said that the Iranians have very clearly articulated that they don't want a weapon. They had agreed not to keep even the enriched uranium with them. So that is only yesterday or day before yesterday's developments. So therefore, after that, when situation happened, then suddenly the United States decides that it is growing impatient, because that's what President Trump says, that if he dictates something, it should be followed. And frankly, that's not going to happen.
Indeed.
And that's why we are looking at this situation.
Indeed.
And what will happen now is that if, because of this, Iranians may not have the capacity to counter both Israel and United States, obviously, US is a big power, but what it will cause is disruption and destruction in the region. And that is what, as Shubhendu was saying, also will have very direct impact on us. Prime Minister Modi has been talking about this peace and dialogue and diplomacy, but there is no place for dialogue and diplomacy between these people who are suffering from the MAD syndrome.
So again, to come back to the point, Ambassador, do you expect or anticipate Tehran to relent or walk back on its stated policy of, one, to retain its right to enrichment, number one, and number two, to not say that we do not want a nuclear weapon? Do you see that happening at all?
Well, if you know that the Ayatollah himself had forbade the nuclear weapon, I mean, that is something they had said many times. Even the Aragachi has again and again mentioned it, that Iran does not want a nuclear weapon. But they want to have, as allowed under the NPT, for them to continue to enrich so that for the civil nuclear purposes. Now they have even agreed that their 400 kilograms that they have, they are ready to keep it with the, not United States, but with Russia, and can buy it as and when they require it. Now that is also up there, so which is something already I think the Iranians, but what is there is the biggest problem is the trust deficit between Israel and Iran. And as Shubhendu was saying, the Israelis live in this perpetual fear of insecurity. It's coming from here and there. So I don't think that that's a very good policy for 70, 80 years to live in fear and always in the bunkers. I mean, that's not something that a country would like to desire, despite how strong you are. Because it's not a very big country, but it's a powerful country. That's the difference.
Indeed.
And I think that this has been totally, in my view, totally a miscalculated and preemptive action, which has preempted any chance of a diplomacy at this stage.
Indeed. Shubhendu, before I come to you, let me also bring in our viewers up to speed with the latest news, this time coming from Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Iranian king or Shah. He's released a video message and he says in it that, and I'm quoting him here, he says, "We are very close to final victory. I want to be by your side as soon as possible so that together we can take back and rebuild Iran." He says, "In these sensitive hours and days, more than ever, we must stay focused on our ultimate goal, reclaiming Iran." Shubhendu, your thoughts, and explain to viewers, if you will, about Reza Pahlavi and his role in all of this as we speak.
Reza Pahlavi, who he is. Reza Pahlavi is son of a former Shah of Iran. In the 1970s revolution, Shah was seen as close to the West, close to the Americans, and with the rise of the Orthodox regime in Iran in 1970-79, there was a toppling of the Shah regime. He had to flee from Iran. He was in exile. Reza Pahlavi happens to be his son, and thereafter, after 1970s, what we saw was the Orthodox regime taking over, of whose representative is Supreme Leader Khamenei, who stands today. He's an old leader, but he does represent that orthodoxy and return to the conservative religious politics in Iran. Ramesh, just to make that point that Ambassador highlighted, I think one of the biggest most dangerous weapon that exists in West Asia, especially among the actors that we're talking about, Israel, United States, and Iran, is not so much of a ballistic missile or nuclear weapon, but most importantly, it's the trust deficit. It has been this historical trust deficit that has existed. Some may even say civilizational trust deficit. But there was this strange but cautious optimism around US President Donald Trump's attempts at striking some kind of a deal with Iran. We know, whatever your perspective may be on President Donald Trump's style of diplomacy, he does in many ways sometimes without reference to historical context, really invest in striking a business deal-like agreement, even with his adversaries. And there was some semblance of that in the several rounds of negotiations, at least 3 with Iran. President Trump had warned from the beginning that if the deals do not work out, a strike is coming. He said that one of the biggest ever, in his words, armada is parked in the Persian Gulf in West Asia to launch that attack. At least 2 major aircraft carrier, USS Abraham Lincoln and Gerald Ford, are parked in West Asia. The submarine support, there are air assets like F-35 stealth fighters. So America was ready in that sense. We were looking at it as more of a posturing while the negotiations were on, a way to pressurize Iran. But it seems now that in President Trump's words, as he just spoke earlier today, he says, we can't take it anymore, is what he says. It is an hour of freedom and an only chance in generation. And that's where the question that you asked, Reza Pahlavi, comes in. By himself, his own appeal or connect with the Iranian people, the opinions may vary, but the situation that we're looking at the moment if indeed America and Israel jointly are able to topple the regime in Iran, it will create a certain power vacuum of a significant proportion. As Ambassador mentioned earlier, if you look at history, America's attempt at toppling governments of adversaries, hasn't really resulted in a prosperous, peaceful world thereafter. And the expectations are not there in Iran either. So that power gap, if it is created, will need to be filled by a certain force which President Trump's in that context would be friendly with Iran, with Israel and United States. So, irrespective of how popular Reza Pahlavi may be, his profile does fit into that that sort of political vacuum, if that is created. But for that to happen, Supreme Leader Khamenei and President Pezeshkian would have to go. So, all eyes on to what extent are the US and Israeli forces able to target the head of the regime, and to what extent Iran is able to protect its government, because the battle is now for the head, Ramesh.
Indeed. Akshay, in the meantime, an Israeli security official is telling Reuters news agency that the operation was planned for months and its timing was set several weeks ago. What are you picking up either from the IDF or the Iranian government, and what are they having to say on the retaliation?
Well, generally when retaliations happened, not a lot of statements or are given rather to ensure that the enemy or the adversary is not alert about the retaliation. So as of now, the statements are only coming in after the retaliations have already taken place, especially when it comes to the Iranian side. The IDF is actively communicating. Recently, they have said that about several missiles have been launched from Iran and they have been intercepted, and direct messages are now being sent to mobile phones of all the peoples across Israel as far as the affected areas are concerned, especially to those areas. More alerts are being sent to ensure that people remain safe, they get timely information to ensure their own safety. But what we also are seeing is that all the measures, if this planning has been done for months, all the measures are also in place. That includes several fifth generation fighter jets, including the F-22s Raptors. That is one of the highest and most sophisticated fighter jet in the world, one of the most capable fighter jet in the world as well. Many of those have been stationed in Negev desert of Israel. So all the preparations are in order to ensure that any kind of retaliation by Iran is stopped, and not much damage is inflicted by the ballistic missile capabilities that Iran possesses. However, the threat still remains, and that is why these alerts and these precautionary messages are being sent to the people. But when it comes to Iran, no direct statement has come in from Khamenei as of now. It's just that even though Iran has been expecting some kind of a strike from Israel, it was not expecting it to come in the middle of talks, and that perhaps is the reason why Iran is keeping silent as far as their own retaliations are concerned. Yes, there are social media handles that are claiming to be associated with the Iranian regime, but these statements that are coming in are very encrypted. The few statements that have come in are encrypted, but that is a precursor usually to a large-scale retaliation that follows. So we will have to wait and see the kind of retaliation that takes place from the Iranian side. But when it comes to preparation and precautions, Israel and the US forces are in full swing to ensure that all the attacks that are carried out by the Iranian regime are thwarted even before they inflict damage.
Ambassador Rigunath, you were talking about the regional dimension to this conflict, and in that context, let me remind our viewers about what the Iranian-backed Houthis have been saying in the last several minutes. The Iranian-backed Houthis are telling Associated Press that they have decided to resume missile and drone attacks on shipping routes and on Israel in support of Iran. If you take a step back and look at the region as a whole, Ambassador, we have Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Iraq, Oman, and a number of other Gulf and Arab countries, including Jordan, where you have served, Ambassador. How do you think these countries will react to this latest escalation? Avoidable, would they think?
Well, I think that just some news is coming. I don't know how far it's true or not that some targets have been hit in Bahrain as well as in Abu Dhabi and Kuwait and Jordan also. I think that the Iranians, as they had promised that in case they are attacked, they will be attacking the U.S. assets in these countries. And that's why when yesterday the United States asked their people in Israel to vacate and other places in the region, it was quite incumbent that the Americans are going to strike with the Israelis. So that was a given at the time. Now I feel that most of the countries in the region have been telling the United States not to attack Iran at this stage and try to work out through some kind of negotiation. Saudi Arabia had very clearly told them, even though it's not that they have a great love or affection for the Iranians, but they know it, that these kind of warfare, if it takes place, Iran has a certain capability that will be very disastrous for everyone. And I think that I'm also quite worried about our own, people as well as our own security and safety, including the energy security and other things that we were trying to branch off to.
Indeed.
So I think that most of the countries, Jordan had said, Bahrain was the only country that has said it will not stop the Americans to use because it hosts the Fifth Fleet there. So it had said that it will not, the rest, everybody had said that they would not allow their airspace to be used or will not, be complicit in attacks against Iran. But this has happened, and this is something, if the reports are true, because in today's time and age, it's very difficult to ascertain unless you get the evidence later on. So if that is true, then obviously the bigger war has begun.
Indeed. And just to again recap the news that we are tracking here on DD India News, our ambassador and Shubhendu as well, the report suggesting that the attack could disrupt oil and gas output in the region and disrupt the energy infrastructure in the region as well. And also India advising, issuing advisory to its citizens in the region. Shubhendu, could you fill us in on that, the reaction from New Delhi?
Have come in for people to first, of course, cancel all their plans to travel to the region, whether Israel or Iran, and also people who are already based are in these countries or in the region. They have been advised to stay at safer places. This is a clear case of expanding conflict, Ramesh. In fact, to add to what the ambassador said, we are getting reports that Bahrain has in fact confirmed the attack on a missile attack on headquarters of the United States Navy's Fifth Fleet that is parked in Bahrain. Iran had mentioned that any attack on Iran would give it a legitimate right to attack any of the, and those bases are all over West Asia, across different countries, allies of United States, Ramesh. So those that threat is now turning into action. Reports of smoke and blasts being heard in Bahrain, particularly in the context of the US Navy's Fifth Fleet. There are also explosions reported in Kuwait. There are emergency sirens that are ringing. Explosions have also reported in Abu Dhabi, the capital of United Arab Emirates. So in that sense, now it seems it is a moment of retaliation by Iran. And as it had said, that its own capacity to directly hit United States may not be developed, but the whole of West Asia, which is the sort of sphere of influence for the Americans and the Israelis, that is now open for attack by Iran, and that is underway. A slew of missiles have already been launched towards Israel. They've been neutralized thanks to the technology of Iron Dome that Israel has, but the other allies, and this is what the allies have been concerned about, Saudi Arabia, UAE, all dissuading United States from any active conflict, launching an all-out attack on Iran, because it is not the United States directly, the mainland, that will have to suffer the repercussions. It is these countries in the region which will have to bear the brunt for their friendship, for their spaces that they've given for American bases. So in that sense, the entire region appears vulnerable now to this conflict, and the Indian advisory in that context becomes important, asking all Indians to first, of course, completely cancel all unnecessary travel to the region, and if they are already in that region, move to safer places as soon as they can.
Indeed, just to again reiterate the point being made there by my colleague Shubhendu reporting that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has said that it responded by launching a quote-unquote first wave of drones and missiles targeting Israel. And Bahrain is saying that a missile attack targeted the US Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in the island kingdom. More on that as we go along. But Ambassador, just to drive home the point, what's really at stake for India and the world at large, if either side doesn't back down or walk back and de-escalate situation, what do you anticipate might happen in the next few hours as we speak? Because developments are taking fast. So what are you anticipating in the next few hours?
On both since this morning. So there will be a shortage of the energy supplies. There will be closure of the SLOC, which will sea lanes of communications, and the Strait of Hormuz, as the Iranians have been saying that this is something they'll do. You will see a lot of shipping being affected by the Houthi attacks. And then the other countries also will start protecting themselves. Unfortunately, they don't have the kind of Iron Dome that Israel has. And so therefore they are fair game in this. And even if some missiles here and there go away and attack on other missiles, because for the moment, I think the Iran is targeting only the American bases in the region, not the countries per se. And this was mentioned by Aragachi in reference to when they attacked in Qatar last time. At the American base. So he had already said that we had informed our brothers in Qatar that it's not against you, it is against the United States, which has forced itself on your territory. So I think that is something that is what we are going to see. Unfortunately, the situation is not looking good at this stage.
Indeed, and in the meantime, Ambassador, I want also to weigh in on the fact that it's been, more than 3 hours since the strikes were launched, and we haven't heard much or anything at all from the countries affected most by these strikes in the region and beyond, except for comments coming from Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv. We haven't heard much from the leaders around the region. Why is that so? Are they still making up their mind, and what are they waiting for?
Well, I think they are not waiting for, they are just not wanting to say anything, because they cannot support Israel or the United States in this. And they don't want to antagonize Iran directly so that they become complicit in the games of Israel and US. So that is something which I believe is the major problem for them. And so if they think that this attack is going to happen, of course, if you remember that Bahrain had made a statement that in case their territory is attacked, then they will retaliate and all that. So now if all these countries start fighting among themselves or start retaliating against Iran or otherwise, then it will be not only the military bases or the US assets alone, it will be those countries as well. So
indeed, then in that case, all bets will be off.
Yes, that's what they want to avoid, probably. But there will be an Arab League meeting and all those kind of things will start happening.
Right, talking of reactions, Ambassador, Russian leader Dmitry Medvedev has commented, no doubt, and he says that derisively referring to Trump as a peacemaker who merely displays a facade. Medvedev says that he compared the young US to the ancient Persian Empire, and he says that he is seeing perceived flaws in Trump's approach towards Iran, condemning the US for what he calls a superficial negotiation strategy with Iran. Your thoughts on the way Russia and possibly China and other powers might react or might choose to go in the next several hours?
Well, I think that this intervene or some way or the other, then obviously they'll be losing a lot of credibility. Because there is an agreement between trilateral agreement as well as there is a defense agreement between Iran and
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, carry on, please.
Yeah. So this is something I believe that if the Russians, the time of statements is gone now, because the US has taken the action. Now it depends upon them. I mean, we have seen recently the Russians and the Iranians had done the military exercises, and the Russians had openly said, Chinese have also said it, that they will come and they will support the the Iranians, I think. Now we have to see what kind of support it will be. I mean, whether they are going to come physically, because with the Iranian oil now being disrupted, it will be directly impacting the Chinese. They are the biggest importers of the Iranian oil as well. So I think that if they want to protect the commercial interests, they will come in.
All right. In the meantime, we're getting some more updates from my colleague Akshay. Akshay, over to you.
Well, Ramesh, talking of reaction, one has come in from Iran, and this is now coming in from the Iranian embassy in India, which states, it starts with a statement of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran regarding the brutal, and I'm reading out the statement now, that in the name of God, the breaker of tyrant, in response to aggression of the hostile and criminal enemy against the Islamic Republic of Iran, the first wave of extensive missile and drone strikes by the Islamic Republic of Iran toward the occupied territories has commenced. Further details will be announced in due course, is what the Iranian embassy in New Delhi is stating now. So clearly, retaliations have started. There is no point of backing down, as far as no question of backing down by Iran at this point in time, which can deal another huge blow to the Islamic regime there in Iran, and can further instigate people to come out against the regime there. So they will have to, even if for the optics only, they will have to carry out a massive retaliation to match the kind of attack that has taken place inside its own territory. So now statements coming in. Finally, it seems that statements are being calibrated and given out to the respective embassies, Iranian embassies around the world that are issuing these statements. The government may also come out and give a presser once they can secure the top leadership of the Iranian government. And it seems that there is going to be no backing down as far as this conflict is concerned, which can now escalate to newer heights and can continue for days to come, given the fact that the build-up has been done by the US and Israel to anticipating a long drawn war against the Iranian regime that can go on for days, given the situation and hostilities that have erupted now with these strikes. Back to you.
All right. Shubhendu and Akshay, do stay on. Let me also thank Ambassador Regunite for joining us on this broadcast. We'll continue our coverage in just a bit, but time for a very short break here on this broadcast. Keep watching DD India. Don't go anywhere.